So bonjour and welcome everyone. Thank you for participating in this industry-wide information session on safety and health in the Manitoba media production industry. Today we're going to be looking at updates and changes to what was originally the first edition of the Manitoba media production industry safety and health guidelines. And in anticipation of publishing the second edition. Je vous remercie de participer dans cette session d'information très importante pour la sécurité de tout le monde. My name is Nicole Madiation and I'm the Executive Director of OnScreen Manitoba. Before we go any further, I want to acknowledge that we are on Treaty 1 territory, and I invite everyone to take a moment to reflect on where we live and who's lived before us and how we can demonstrate our gratitude in every day. In order to prepare the safety and health guidelines, many people have contributed to the development of the first edition and as well as to the second edition. So what we have done collectively as an industry is we have taken workplace safety and health legislation and grouped it in a guide that speaks very specifically to the media production industry, so that all of you who work in the industry, all of us who work in the industry, have easy access to some of the most pertinent legislation. The first edition was published in 2015. And so there have been some changes in workplace legislation since that time. And we're very pleased to be rolling out a second edition with some updates and other improvements. Before we go any further, I would just like to take a few minutes to recognize all of the industry stakeholders who have participated to preparation both of the first guide and of the guide that we'll be reviewing today. So I see that Manitoba Film and Music is in the room. I can't see everybody who is in the room, but Rachel Rusin, the CEO and Film Commissioner of Manitoba Film and Music, I believe, was planning to join us. And I wanted to allow her a few moments to say a few words. So perhaps Rachel hasn't joined us yet. I know that Kenny Boyce was also planning to join us, and I can't see if everybody is in the room right now or not. I'll just allow a moment if Kenny Boyce is present, if he wanted to say a few words. So moving along, I would also like to recognize Melissa Capist, who is the Manitoba Film Liaison for Sport, Culture and Heritage, who has also contributed, whose department has also contributed to facilitating updates and changes to this guide. Everybody is very busy. I know, and all have been involved, and we really are very pleased to have their contributions.
I'm sorry, Nicole, Melissa's actually just joining, so I wanted to give her that chance to get connected and see if she's able to speak.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
All right, sorry I'm a little bit late, was just on a phone call that I was trying to get off quickly. Happy to be here today, and just want to thank everybody involved who's been working so diligently on this. Rob Kennedy, of course, has been working on this for years, and you know, it's integral to our industry, and I'm just looking forward to hearing the presentation. So thanks to all of you.
Thank you, Melissa. I'd now like to turn to Monique Perot, who's the business agent for IATSE 856. I believe she's joined us, and also would like to give a shout out to IATSE 856, who have contributed financially to make sure that we could complete the updates in a timely manner.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming today. Hold on one sec. Allergies, not COVID. I just wanted to thank On-Screen Manitoba and Rob Kennedy and Jack Slessor for their tireless work on developing this guide. I also know that I just wanted to say thank you to Terrence, whose insight I rely on so that he'll bring some comments on the document. So I just want to say thank you, and I am looking very forward to the presentation as well.
Thank you, Monique. I would now like to invite Gary Nelson, the business agent for DGC. And thank you to DGC, which also contributed to financially to allow the review and update of the guide.
Thank you, Nicole, and thank you to On-Screen for hosting this and being such an active advocate for moving forward with this revised booklet. Physical and emotional well-being of people in our production industry is critical to us and our membership. This industry is quite unique in that we really don't have a bricks and mortar situation where your traditional workplace safety and health committees can be established. So it's critical that we build a robust and knowledgeable workforce with regards to safety and health. And I see this guide as one more step towards achieving that goal of making sure everybody is safe in this industry and in the workplace in general. And again, thank you, and we're looking forward to the presentation.
Thank you, Gary. I'd now like to allow Rob Macklin, the business agent for ACTRA, to also say a couple of words of greeting.
I thought you were going to say a couple of words of wisdom. I'm so glad you didn't.
Well,
anyway,
wisdom, please.
I would welcome everybody and thank you for attending, and also thank everybody who participated in this. Safety is so important to our industry. And from a performer's point of view, it is especially important, and we rely very heavily on other people to make our performers safe on set. So we have a very strong interest in safety guidelines. Again, just like to welcome everybody, and let's continue.
Thank you, Rob. And I'd now like to call on Alison Bile from Film Training Manitoba.
We just want to, FTM just wants to thank On-Screen for inviting us to listen in on this important information session on the updates to the second edition of this guide. And I just look forward to hearing the updates from Jack and Rob. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Alison. So just a couple of housekeeping notes before we get started. The chat will be directed towards the host. So if you have questions as we go through the presentation, please feel free to put them in. There will be a question and answer session towards the end of the presentation, and Rob and Jack will endeavor to answer as many questions as possible. You'll also have the opportunity to raise your electronic hand or virtual real hand via Zoom when we get to the question and answer section, and we will do our best to respond during the session. And if there are questions that require further follow-up, we will also work towards getting back to you in the next few days. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome Rob Kennedy. Many of you will know Rob from when he was the film liaison with Sport, Culture and Heritage, previously where Melissa is now working. And Rob was the pen behind the first version of the guide. So we were very, very pleased that as part of his retirement gig, he agreed to help us with the second version. And a very warm welcome also to Jack Slessor, prevention consultant at Safe Work Manitoba. Many of you will have already been in sessions with Jack. He is our go-to person for workplace safety and health. So over to you, Rob and Jack. Thank you.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, thank you.
Yeah, and I'll call Jack, weigh in anytime. I also noticed that I wore the wrong shirt today. I see I'm fluorescing all over the place, so my apologies for that. Next slide, please. Perfect. So the guide is a compilation of safety and health guidelines based on legislative changes between 2005 and today. There was a significant amendment to the Act and the regulations that was passed in 2020. And workplace safety and health helped us identify what those changes were. And we launched, I can't remember when, a while ago, a month or two ago, on sort of a comprehensive, not a rewrite, but so we didn't change everything by any stretch, but only those things really that had been identified. But I wanted to say that primarily the purpose of these changes that Manitoba made and approved were as a result of changes to federal legislation, safety and health legislation, and that legislation of other provinces and territories to try to harmonize across the country as much as is possible. So, and there's a few new things that hadn't been in the guide before, but I wanted to make sure that you guys understood that the document that this PowerPoint is about is a guideline only. It by no means reflects all the information in the 358 page, that's just one official language, by the way, 358 page Act and regulation. And for a little light reading, I invite anyone to look at that document or those documents, but it's primarily the regulation, which is the latter half of that 358 pages that has the meat and potatoes of what's important and what the do's and don'ts and and many more scenarios that aren't necessarily applicable to this industry. So so this is a guideline. It's not an instruction manual, and you should refer to the Act and regulations for all official interpretations. And this, I think, will help you get there. There's numerous links in the new guideline itself to the legislation or sections of the legislation. And that's where you need to go for the meat and potatoes. It also incorporates recent feedback. We had a senior staff at Workplace Safety and Health, Darren James, who did a read of the document and provided numerous notes on changes, as well as Jack Slessor, my co-presenter here today. And we've received feedback thus far from DGC, and we're hoping to hear from 856 shortly, and anything else that ACTRA and the other, consultants, contractors, et cetera, within the industry about these changes. But the other thing we simplified the department names somewhat. So there's some changes in the document that was shared with the unions and guilds that are just simply changes to the department name and things like that. One of the not too subtle changes was direction from Workplace Safety and Health to change the language from the first edition to the next edition, from the employer should do this, or the department head should do that. And in the main, we've changed that to you shall do that. Less, more official certainly, but there's at least 250 changes in the document that reflect the importance of what your respective responsibilities are as employers or representatives of those of the employer, or being a department head, to the workers beneath you. Next slide, please. So the next 2 slides are of things that haven't changed or haven't changed yet. So most of the document, there's been really no changes to, although there's some shoulds that are shalls in these things. That's really the only kind of change. So rigging, transportation, motorcycles, stunts, high falls and airbags, smoke inhalation. I won't read the whole thing, but there's lots that there's no change to currently.
Rob, can I just mention that when you reference there's new things in here, like of course the pandemic was obvious, something that we wanted to add. There's other areas that were added in here because of, in the past 5 years, they've come to the attention. A lot of it came actually to my attention through Terrence at IATSE and his members bringing up, questions about trends, because the film industry in particular seems to, there's a trend, and suddenly there was more use of filming around water. There was more use of this kind of technology or circumstances that they anticipated we might see more of. So we thought, well, should we add those in? And so some of these are reflected in this this document too. So I just wanted to make sure that people understood that as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Jack. So I guess, as I say, I don't need to read all these things, but there's an opportunity for you to get a copy of this PowerPoint after the presentation today. So next slide, please. So we updated the introduction a little bit, but it essentially specifies the origin of the document, provides background on the second edition, and it also has a list of all the things that have changed. But the other thing I wanted to point out is that, like, one of the changes that was made is that everyone in the industry has a legal and moral responsibility for workplace safety. So if you see something, talk to someone, talk to your immediate supervisor about it. It's important that we have this inherent, that everybody on set or everybody involved has an appreciation for safety issues and doesn't sit idly by while something risky is occurring. The other thing that I think, we can, there was a letter to the editor about this in the paper today. It was about COVID and the rules, but regardless of the nuances of the legislation and how many employees you have or how long your shoot is, I think it's an expectation, an industry expectation, that every production, regardless of the size, regardless of the length of the shoot, will either have a workplace safety and health committee or a representative, at the very least, somebody whose job it is to be the go-to person. And let's not look for ways around having to do this. Let's look for ways to do this safely and efficiently. Jack's nodding. Yeah, I got something to add to that.
Just that I hear this often when I'm teaching and working with committees, Rob, and the bottom line is, whether it's a committee required by legislation, whether it's a representative, or whether you say, ooh, dodge the bullet, don't need it. The bottom line is those are all just tools to help the workplace and the employer ensure that everybody's as safe, whether I have 1 employee or 300 crew members. Every one of them is required and should be given the same level of safety and health. So you're right. When people ask, how can I get around it? It is a little disappointing. So yeah, I agree. Everybody needs to be part of it. I love that comment, the word robust earlier. I like that by Gary. That's what this is all heading to. I agree. This guideline is going to go a long way to that again. Thanks.
Next slide, please. So sprinkled throughout the new guideline is the contact information. There used to be an after hours number, but now all of these numbers are after hours. So that's one subtle change to the, so these are all 24/7. The other thing I wanted to add here was that employers must ensure their representatives, i.e. production managers, etc., people who represent the employer, are appropriately trained and have the ability to assess safety issues that are brought to them, and that they will act to ensure everyone's safety. So a degree of training is required by everybody, and it's the employer's responsibility to ensure that, through the unions and guilds, of course, but it's something that you'll see throughout the document is employers must or employers shall ensure, but training, and that's, workshop safety and health training at various levels of areas of responsibility. In this, the other thing is that in this guideline number 1, safety, responsibilities, and duties, there's descriptions of what the producers must do, the production managers, the first AD and second AD, and department heads. And department heads are responsible to ensure that the people under them are following the rules and are appropriately attired and aren't cutting corners. And that the employers must also ensure that safety and health representatives and committee members are trained and are competently able to fulfill their duties in that role. So you don't just push the new person, you be on the safety and health committee. If that person doesn't know anything about safety and health, they shouldn't be on the committee, and they should get some training. And this is something where for FTM and the unions and guilds to ensure happens. Guideline number 2. So this was reworded from the previous version, which said procedure for work refusal. And this now says right to refuse dangerous work. And there's a nuance there in that, you don't have the right to refuse because you don't like someone necessarily or whatever. You only have the right to refuse and the rights around that if you view it as dangerous work. It also gives you some guidance as to what reasonable grounds to believe it's dangerous work are. And the employer, again, when inspecting a dangerous condition that's been brought forward by a worker, that representative of the employer, has to have the chair of the safety or one of the chairs of the safety committee or a committee member and or a worker and that safety representative. And they need to know how to respond to these things that are brought to them. So next slide, please. Did you have anything to add on right to refuse dangerous work there, Jack?
Only that probably that I think what people may not understand is that it's a formalized, very public. I mean, you know, this, and it's intentional, and we talk about it when we train people on it. And you're right, whether you're a committee member, all supervisors that are involved, they need to understand that there's, once somebody formally says, hang on a second, I want to exercise my right to refuse, and they put their hand out, it now has started what is essentially a set legal process. And you can't just decide, I'm going to, you know what, time's running out, we're losing the light, I'm going to do an end run, because somebody has started a process and it has to be followed through. So just that, Rob, I appreciate that, what you're talking about, that people need to understand. It's about dangerous work. It's not about, you know, I'm going to get an ergonomic sore back if I sit in that chair, you know, for 12 hours today. That's not seen as something that should be used for this. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Jack. Guideline 3, first aid. This is one of the sections that was significantly changed. And again, primarily because just to harmonize with federal legislation. There's a, for those who have seen the blue copy or the copy of the draft guideline that dated 21 May 2021, the text in blue, and virtually all of first aid is in blue now. It's about page 65-ish, somewhere around there, if I recall correctly. And it also directs you to, there's an accompanying Appendix A, which has charts in it that says, I've got, you know, this many employees at a work site. I need this kind and this kind of first aid kit. And here's the contents of those first aid kits. And you need, you know, X number of first aiders, you know, basic first aiders or intermediate first aiders or advanced first aiders, depending on the number of people on the job. It also differentiates between, you know, a near work site, a remote work site, or an isolated work site. And this also comes into play when we're talking about the working alone policy, which is further on in the presentation today. So, and there's also, I think, new descriptions of what basic, intermediate, and advanced are, or criteria. There's also a direct link in the document to a workplace safety and health incident report and investigation report. It's a template that you could use, you know, should something of significance occur. You know, the need to report incidents when they occur and not duck and weave. Do you have something to say there about first aid, Jack?
Just that people should please keep in mind that even the legislation, minimum requirement, nothing just generally, plus percent of workplaces actually do more than are required by the legislation. So this is, feel comfortable to do more then. Okay.
Thanks, Jack. Guideline 4. Carpentry woodworking. It says rope access, but that's the next one. So this is more about carpentry, the shop tools and things like that. So you have to establish a lockout procedure that must be used when any equipment is found to be faulty or is being serviced, repaired, tested, cleaned, or maintained. And it's literally put a chain around it and a padlock. Or, you know, I know that my table saw has a key you remove and it won't operate without that key in it. Similarly, the guideline recommends that inspection of all power tools before use and lock out anything that is hazardous or faulty And we did get some feedback about, lockout and mark or tag.
Yeah.
And if you could just talk a little bit about why we didn't put lockout and tag, Jack.
Okay, sure, Rob. Originally in the legislation, it did speak to lockout tagout, and that was sort of the industry norm. And what they found, though, was that over time, people started doing a shortcut, and they would just sort of just look around, tag it out. And I guess you could argue, well, that was safe. Only in instances, of course, where people respected that tag. And unfortunately, what happened is over time, there was an evolution, and then people began to say, well, you know what, it's just a tag. You know what, it's not as serious as a lockout. And practically, frankly, if it was a matter of operational importance, I had to get her done, as they say, people were just ripping the tag off and putting it in place. So there was a conscious change many years ago, and they removed it. And they said, no, if we're going to talk about a tag, the only tag you're talking about is a tag that would indicate lock on the lock itself. It's locked out, and the tag tells me who the name of the person that owns that lock, because each person in an industry setting where people have the ability to lock out equipment, they are given their own locks. So the tag would tell you it's Jack's lock. Here's my contact information. Here's where I'm working today, in what area, because it could be along around the corner. If I'm de-energizing a piece of equipment here, I may be working around the corner. And fourth, it tells me the timeline so that people know I'm going to be working on it for 2 hours or whatever. So Rob, if you come along and you see this tag on and it's after the hours, you're calling me to say, why is your lock still on here? That's the kind of, and it resulted, of course, from fatalities, people getting electrocuted or either killed because that process wasn't followed. So we don't use the lockout tagout terminology anymore, and that's why.
Thanks, Jack. Next slide. Oh, one other point. Sorry. And if a worker sees something in the industry, out there in the field that is pouring rain and there's a cable with a cord dangling, the plug dangling off the cord or something, tell your supervisor right away. That should not be allowed to happen. So inform your supervisor ASAP and get that dealt with. Next slide. So rope access, and this was more or less a significant change, and it includes much more detail. So workers can only perform rope access work, which I would, rappelling down the side of something, if it's not practically feasible for the worker to comply with the fall protection regs elsewhere in the document while performing the work in question. Rope access workers have to be trained and certified. Employers must ensure that the workers use certified equipment. Employers must ensure rope access work is planned, performed, and supervised in accordance with IRATA and SPRAT. And the document says what they are, but I'll tell you. IRATA is the International Code of Practice and Training Assessment Certification Scheme, I think is American. And SPRAT is the Society of Professional Rope Access Technicians, and they have accreditation programs so nobody can rappel off the side of a building or go and deal with that satellite dish that's out of character in your 1950s movie. Unless they have these accreditations or some other method of doing this work needs to be found. All right, moving on. Next slide, please. So ladders and scaffolding. So ladders, most of it is pretty straightforward, but there are strict federal safety standards, and that you have to see that certification by CSA or another body, and the guide details who those federal authorities are, or recognized authorities. It's also the manufacturer's responsibility to post and provide, when you buy a ladder, there's an instruction manual and permitted uses. And the obvious ones are, you may not perform work from the top of 2 rungs or steps or cleats of a ladder unless it has a railed platform at the top, and it's intended for that purpose, and that is permitted under the manufacturer's specifications. So pretty straightforward, but I don't know how many times, even watching lifestyle TV, you see workers standing on the very top of a step ladder with their hands above their heads, fixing some light all the time. And it's dangerous work. And if that happened on a movie set and that person fell and hit their head, they and the supervisor and the producer have broken the law by allowing it. So pay attention to these kinds of things. The other thing I should just point out is that there's 3 different classes of ladder you can buy at Home Depot. And, the little home handyman one should never be used. But I think that's a class 1. And a class 3 is the professional one. Is that right, Jack? Class 3 is?
I seem to remember there was class and there was ABC, but ultimately, yeah, you're right. You can't take something that's meant for the home owner and bring it to workplace. Yeah,
it's a huge difference between a ladder that is for professional use, and and most of those ladders are rented by a production or provided by a contractor, and they should be the professional line in use. Next slide, please. Scaffolding. So I know that scaffolding is used a ton on film sets, depending on the nature of the production. And these rules and regs have changed somewhat, but it shouldn't be news to anyone that, if the work can't be done safely from the ground or a ladder, and a ladder for short durations only, then a scaffold or an elevated work platform needs to be provided. The employers must develop, train workers, and ensure compliance with safety procedures for scaffolds and elevated work platforms. As part of that training and developing a plan is that they have to have an emergency response plan, so that when that window washer on the side of a 32nd floor of a skyscraper and the power goes out, how do they get down? How do you get them down? You got to have a plan for that. I know in the theater world, and sometimes in movie sets, they use bosun's chairs, and you can't do it unless there's a plan to get the person off that bosun's chair. So next slide is more scaffolding. When installing, maintaining, using, or dismantling scaffolds, always follow the manufacturer's specifications. Any alterations to the scaffolding, in other words, if it's not assembled in a manner as described in the manufacturer's specifications, then a professional engineer must design, draw, and approve and stamp your plan. There should be a copy of the manufacturer's specifications and a certified drawing of any alterations from an engineer available on site. Next slide, please. Certain scaffolding configurations must be certified, and the operator must have a copy of their certificate. Oh no, sorry, go back one. There we go. Certain scaffolding configurations must be designed by an engineer and installed according to those specifications. The other thing that's interesting, which I suspect happens all the time in production, is that any scaffolding or elevating device that's used to hang large drapes or tarpaulins or silks must be certified by an engineer. And a copy of that design and spec must be available on site. And those scaffolds that need engineering certification are, there's height. The guide goes into great detail on the height and whether it's open access scaffolding or a hoarded scaffolding. But the key is that the people who are using that scaffolding need to know what to do and how to egress in case of an emergency or the power goes out or whatever might happen. Guideline 7. Camera cranes and mobile elevating work platforms rather. So crane and lift operators must be certified, and that operator must have a copy of the certification on their person. And I presume you guys know this already. Approved harness and lanyards must be worn when working on these platforms. Lanyards have to be attached in accordance to the manufacturer's specifications or the specs of a professional engineer. Guideline 8, generators. And I'm not sure if this is news to any people in the electrical department, but generators shall be grounded and have an emergency stop system. Manitoba Safety and Health legislation requires that generators be grounded with a metal rod sunk 3 to 4 feet in the ground. Always perform a risk assessment before pounding in a rod, and call before you dig hotline prior to grounding rod installation. Next slide, please. Sorry, I was just checking the time. Chemical guidelines and hair and makeup. And this is something I'm personally interested in learning a little bit more about from those departments or that department. But the Food and Drug Act, which is federal, defines cosmetics and what is considered a hazardous product. Health Canada regularly reviews the chemical ingredients and prohibits or limits the use of certain ingredients that present health risks. Always read the label, follow directions when using cosmetics. And it provides, the guide provides links to products that are restricted, a method by which you can report an incident involving a consumer product, and tips for cosmetic and cosmetic safety. Again, federal government legislation. Guideline 10. Hazardous products, paints, glues, solvents, stains, airborne hazards, non-airborne hazards, and more. Employers must consider the risks and hazards of chemicals and the regulatory requirements for those chemicals. Again, federal legislation dictates that, and it's also mentioned in the Manitoba Regulation, Part 35, WEMIS, and Part 36, Chemical and Biological. It also provides information on how to determine what the acceptable concentration limits may be. Next slide, please. Employers must assess and evaluate risks posed by hazardous products in consultation with the Workplace Safety and Health Committee, a representative, or the workers themselves. Employers must develop and train workers, ensure compliance of all safe work procedures. There, for airborne hazards, refer to the threshold limit values and the biological exposure indices published by the American Conference of Governmental Industrial Hygienists. So there's a place to go to look all this stuff up. And please do if you've got something that is, that someone's had an adverse reaction to, for example.
Rob, can I just add as well that one of the things that we discovered in the last year and the work that I've been doing with a lot of workplaces because of the products being used now to sanitize fog for COVID was sort of a new awareness that not everything is apples to apples. And by that, I mean, when we talk about chemicals, is it a chemical that when you're right, you said follow manufacturer's instructions, and they would get a chemical that would be, they'd say, okay, this is good for, application, spray bottle application, okay? Then they would use it in a fogger, and they would be unaware to them until they did more research that by doing that, they changed the chemical composition, and thereby they were fixing one hazard, but they were creating another. So I think it's a heads up to people just to be aware to really look down and make sure you're even to the point where if you've got a chemical that says it can be used for fogging, there's different types of fogging machines, and they can change the chemical, structure of that chemical. And I'm not a hygienist, so I can't explain it the way that they try to explain it to me, but it's really important that this is why committees and worker reps should be involved in this. A second pair of eyes and second person to question that. Thank you.
Thanks, Jack. All right. Let's move on. We got more hazardous products. PPE that's used must meet the requirements of Part 6 of the Act. And I think we've all heard about that, from a recent COVID experience with, certain types of masks and things like that. So be on the top of your game when looking at that stuff. The other one that I thought was important is that no eating and drinking in an area where hazardous chemicals are being used. Don't sit down and have your lunch in the paint booth. And strangely enough, in the theater world, it happens all the time because there's no space. And, the prop shop just was spray painting something in a cardboard box in the back, in the loading dock. And everyone in the buildings, the loading dock just happens to be near the air intake for the whole building. So you gotta pay attention to these things and don't eat your overspray. Temporary location facilities, confined spaces. So this is a new one to me. And Jack can no doubt, maybe I'll talk for a minute and then you talk a little bit about it. I was trying to envision how this would apply to the film and television industry, realizing that, if there was a scene where an actor was stuck in a well and, or something, that you'd build something in the shop that looked like it was a hole in the ground, that had a side missing or had a breakaway wall or something. But I think, where it applies is it's in derelict buildings, where you're filming the disaster movie, number 82, and you've got crew or techs crawling around in tunnels and or in confined spaces to run cables that can't be seen by the camera and things like that. But so that's why this is in here, is that there may be instances where there's no other way around it.
Yeah, and Rob, one of the changes they made, and if you go on Workplace Safety and Health website right now, they used to have all 4 codes of practice. They've removed the confined space because they're trying to update it to reflect the change, and now they've got confined space and a hazardous confined space. And really the short story on the hazardous confined space is it's a reference to, is it a confined space? Is it have limited egress and access? Okay, fine. It's not meant for, a regular sort of human occupancy. Okay, it fits all that. Then you've got ones that they fit that, but there's no particular hazards in there. There's no air quality hazards. You've got others where you throw a switch, something can happen, and suddenly that air, or it can fill with water, and suddenly I'm now at risk of drowning. And when you're describing that, Rob, in the old buildings, for me, I mean, you're right. I can't imagine perhaps an actor being put in that situation, but my imagination suddenly goes to, I could probably imagine crews trying to get that shot, that perfect shot, may find themselves in that space, in such a space, and what they may not consider is, could the air quality in that change in a second? And if it did, what's your backup plan? And thanks for that emergency, for referencing again the importance of the emergency backup plan, Rob, because folks, that's absolutely crucial. Without that, you could hopefully take something with it that could be critical, catastrophic, and you can bring it down to somebody's going to, get some first aid. It can make that much of a difference. So that's very important.
So basically, before a worker could enter a confined space, the employer must identify and assess, reduce, control, eliminate the risks, identify and provide PPE, ensure a standby worker, qualified in first aid, is at hand and is in continuous communication with the person that's down the hole, or wherever, and ensure that air quality in the confined space is tested by an accredited professional and ventilated to maintain safe levels.
And Rob, I just want to add to that, please, the importance that when the crews leave that space for 20 minutes or an hour and they come back, the air has to be tested again, because of situations where in that scenario, unbeknownst to them, somebody working somewhere else had disturbed that air and people died because they came back. Let's made the assumption, well, it was good at 8 this morning until we left at 9:30. We're good. It's now 11, and they were wrong. So just throwing that out there. It's important.
Thanks, Jack.
Okay.
Next slide, please. Winnies and honey wagons. The only change was that the vehicle or generator must be shut down and allowed to cool off before you refuel. So it was the cool off before refueling, which was the only change there. Minor, but important nonetheless. Use of roads and highways. So this one has changed quite a bit since 2015, the previous one, partly due to pressure on law enforcement and some of the issues that had arisen when I was still in Melissa's chair. So it has been rewritten, and location manager, none of this will be unfamiliar to any location managers who are on the call today. So I'll just run through it quickly. So productions must seek permission or a permit to close roads or control traffic. The contacts would be Manitoba Infrastructure Traffic Engineering for provincial roads and highways, municipalities, and or municipal authorities like Katie Boyce's office to do this. Interestingly, well, I'll get into that in a sec. Traffic authority will determine what the risk level is of your proposed activity, and will direct the production as to the requirements to complete the permit process. The location manager or a third-party traffic services company must prepare and submit a formal traffic management plan to the traffic authority. And, that plan should have overhead photos, copies of, or pictures overhead photos that have been photoshopped to add, signage at, 500 meters, you got to have this kind of sign and that kind of thing. Also a letter of support, it's a provincial road, but it's running through the RM of Reynolds. So you should need, the traffic authority will likely want to see a copy of a letter or an email so that the rural municipality is in agreement with the plan, even though they're not the traffic authority per se. But there's also numerous situations where it's a shared jurisdiction. You're trying to close down the main street in a rural Manitoba town, but it just happens to be a highway too. So it's shared jurisdiction. So technically the traffic authority is the municipality, but they can't give you permission because it's the provincial road without the province saying yes. So it's communicate all the time. Similarly, there's bridges. Sometimes the bridge is provincial, but the road on it belongs to the town, city, or municipality. And the key here for safety is it's always safest to seek permission to close the road entirely as your number one option for seeking permission. But know that you may not get permission to close the highway number one on the day at the time that you want to do it, unless there's some very strict criteria surrounding it. So the traffic authority is the authority here, and you need to dialogue with them directly and thoroughly. Next slide, please. So subject to the authority of or permission and approval by the traffic authority, employers must ensure flag persons are certified, formally certified as flag persons, and carry their certificate with them and are appropriately equipped. And a certified flag person must wear high visibility apparel that's from head to foot, ankles to hands, wear a hard hat, and that it's a beautiful, what is it? It's not blaze orange, it's a fluorescent greeny orange. I'm colorblind, so I don't know what color it is, but, and wear a hard hat. They cannot use personal electronic devices. They cannot use media players. They cannot have handheld devices or cell phones, or at least have them on. They can and should have a radio, a two-way radio with their counterpart at the other end of the road closure or whatever it might be. It's also important to note that high-vis vests are mandatory for all workers on a road or street or exposed to vehicular traffic. So everybody, including, the actor can only take it off just before the camera rolls. But everybody else needs to wear them. And at night, flag persons must have a flashlight fitted with a red signaling wand and must be clearly visible to approaching traffic. So on this, I have some interesting and good news, is that Bill 23, the amendments to the Highway Traffic Act for flag persons, received royal assent on Thursday, May 20th, last Thursday of this week. And that allows volunteers, appropriately attired volunteers, and hard-hatted and accredited the ability to controlled traffic at places like the Folk Festival, and film workers who are appropriately certified, trained, and attired to be flag persons. However, all of that is subject to the traffic authority's approval of your traffic management plan. And location managers will know that it's no small thing to get permission to close a road or a main street in a town, or particularly for extended periods of time. So, but the good news is that we've been sort of tracking this for years now, but I just looked it up on the website an hour ago, and it received royal assent last Thursday. So it's time the film industry thought about a training plan for certified flag persons. And those certified flag persons, can you talk a little bit about where that kind of training is available and to whom FTM could partner to get that done, Jack?
Well, there was discussion about it changing because it used to be MIT, the province, and Manitoba Heavy, and I'm sure it's still Manitoba Heavy, but I'm not sure if it's Construction Safety Association, Rob. I've made a note here on this, on my printout of the slides, and I'll find out who is now that it's received royal assent, I'll see who is officially going to be offering the training.
I had thought that Safety Services Manitoba offered that training too.
Okay, yeah, they may too. Yeah.
Anyway, there's existing curriculum and trainers out there, and I'm sure FTM would be delighted to partner with those folks.
Can I jump in just for a second there, Rob? It's Melissa, just with an update on that. Sorry, while you're there, instead of waiting till the end. So Manitoba Infrastructure is preparing draft stakeholders notification right now. So we'll be getting in touch with all of the stakeholders. And there has been some internal discussion on training. So there'll be more updates on that in the very near future.
Perfect.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
Quite all right. Thanks, Melissa. All right. Guideline 12, water locations. This is pretty straightforward. Really, the only thing that changed here was that there is more people than CSA, or more agencies than Canadian Standards Association, that can approve PFDs now, personal flotation devices, including Fisheries and Oceans Canada and that. But I wanted to put just a little cautionary note there that there's many PFDs currently for sale at Canadian Tire that are not, that do not meet these standards. For example, the PFDs that have a tremendous amount of mobility for things like stand-up paddle boards and things like that are not certified PFDs. They're a good thing to have, but so, if you're sending a shopper to buy personal flotation devices that are certified, make sure they look at the label. Guideline 13, water hazards. So this is new, and I think Jack had sort of inspired me to do some research on this, and I had a good look at some of the film, excuse me, policies in Ontario to get some of this information. But the key is that small controlled ponds on studio property must be kept drained. Now, I would presume these are, above ground pools that are being used for some purpose, on a film studio property. But they must be drained, may only be filled immediately prior to production, and must be drained when production is completed. And I couldn't find anywhere the definition of a small controlled pond versus a large, like how big are we talking? And a large controlled pond on studio property must be tested for contaminants prior to production. Water must meet applicable regulatory standards for recreational full body contact. So a pool, like a pool testing kit, that kind of thing, makes sense to obviously have a contractor do that for you, whoever did it. And as I say, I couldn't really find a definition of small versus large, but I figured if you have to drain it every day after production and fill it up, a small pond is something that won't take a day to fill, whereas a large pond probably would take a day to fill. So I suspect there's more detailed information out there. Next slide, please. Ponds on studio property. Employers must develop procedures for safe use of electrical equipment and chemicals that could react with the water. Must develop emergency plans for these and other scenarios so they can be reduced or eliminated. Employers must consider issues related to engineered weight restrictions, access and egress in the event of a catastrophic failure or the breach. And just anecdotally, I watched a YouTube video of somebody's rather large above ground pool in their yard that, you know, dad was going for a field goal or going for a touchdown in the football game and caught the ball and then hit the side of the pool, collapsed it, and, you know, all the grandchildren were swept out of this hole and took the deck out of the house and filled the basement with water. So, yeah, you know, you got to be cautious about these things and have a plan. You know, and you know, the forklift operator turns around too quickly and puts a pallet through the side of the pond, and what happens? So, anyway, employers responsible to make sure things are controlled. Next slide, please. Employers must ensure water quality and ensure it's safe in bodies of water, ponds, swamps, that kind of thing. Gather all obtainable knowledge from local authorities on currents, winds, storms, natural hazards, upstream configurations like a dam or a waterfall or something like that. Employers, if employer identifies a safety hazard, they must inform cast and crew and take precautions to minimize or eliminate the risk or relocate the shooting site. Guideline 15. Operators of self-driving vehicles must have 180 degrees of vision, even if it's a closed set. So the scenario, I guess, is that a pilot, I don't know if you call him a driver if it's a self-driving vehicle, but the pilot, you know, needs to have a full view and isn't just staring at their monitor, you know, that they can see everything 180 degrees. Anything to add to that one, Jack?
No. I mean, it makes sense. Yeah.
Okay. Next slide, please. Animal handling. So this guideline changed a little bit after our, what was that movie with the dog in it? A Dog's Purpose.
A Dog's Purpose, right.
A Dog's Purpose. So there was a little, you know, a media incident, I suppose. So we had the provincial veterinarian weigh in and a few other people weigh in terms of the language we had in the 25 documents. So the changes really reflect feedback from the provincial veterinarian's office about what should be in our animal handling guidelines. So there's minor changes there and contact information changes. Next, how am I doing for time? Or are we doing for time? 4:12. Okay, I better speed up. Skydiving. A skydive coordinator's got to be responsible for the safety of skydive. They must assess the location, the weather, communications, security, equipment, props, etc. You know, prove all the props, wardrobe, and things like that. Next slide. UAV. So this, for those who use UAVs and know that the guideline reflected, you know, the old federal legislation and regs. This is all UAVs, you know, virtually everything. If you're an inch off the ground, you're in federal jurisdiction. So the drone regs were rewritten in 2019 and became law, I think in 2019. And that, you know, there's a little looser, frankly, restrictions on one hand. On the other hand, everybody has to be, all the pilots have to carry a valid pilot certificate, and there's different levels based on the size and scope of that. So the changes here, drone pilots who are in the room or members of your union will know what these rules are. The only other note I have here is that a drone pilot and a production must have the permission of the landowner to take off and land. For example, the government of Manitoba could not prevent you from flying your drone over the ledge or Memorial Boulevard, but they will never give you permission to take off and land from Memorial Park or the ledge grounds, or at least a year ago. You know, you can take off from somewhere else that you have permission, but you can't take off and land unless that landowner has given you that permission. Next one, underwater stunts, underwater film operations. Again, the employer must develop, implement, and train workers. Divers must meet the CSA requirements. The employer, producers, need to have a copy of that certification of those divers. There's been some federal legislative changes there. Next one, working alone or working in isolation. Employers must identify and assess, reduce, or eliminate risks with someone working alone, must develop and train and implement workers to ensure compliance with those safe work procedures, which must include a regular form of communication. You know, their boss phones them once an hour to make sure everything is okay, or whatever it may be. Establish, again, training requirements and ensure safety supplies are available. Procedures must be posted in a conspicuous place at the workplace. You know, in a film context, I guess I think about the lone security person sitting on a chair beside the, you know, the construction toilet and the fridge in the middle of the night. But again, there has to be a protocol for that worker to be relieved, to get some food, or to be in contact with somebody to ensure that they're safe and on the job. New guideline number 30, biohazards, epidemic and pandemic preparedness. So this guideline is new, although it's not intended to replace the existing COVID protocols that you guys have in spades already. It talks about COVID and the lessons learned by COVID, but you know, in dealing, and the industry dealing with the new operational changes that have occurred, but it's not a COVID-19 section. It's about it's about biohazards, epidemic, and pandemic preparedness in the future as they emerge, or hopefully not as often or as badly. And employers are encouraged to develop sort of a business continuity plan to mitigate the risks of future outbreaks, you know, and that, next slide, please. You know, should a serious infectious disease outbreak or pandemic be foreseen, the employer has significant responsibilities and must make plans for multiple operating scenarios. Again, you guys learned about that in spades in the last 14 months. It's also recommended that many practices developed during COVID become routine going forward. Like perhaps we don't have the buffet luncheon that anymore, you know, as opposed to going back to that and then having to change again. Maybe we need to morph that craft services piece into something that's sustainable in any circumstance. It also just clarifies the implementation and the intent of this guideline. Next slide. So it's the employer's responsibility to accommodate workers who self-identify as high risk in the event of any pandemic, epidemic, or biohazard, i.e. the person who's deathly allergic to peanuts. You know that, make sure that, you know, I'm not quite sure what other scenarios there may be. And an employer must provide workers with information on who is considered high risk in any given scenario. And workers must be given ample opportunity to self-identify as high risk. There's a link to a Government of Canada website too, regarding high-risk individuals. First aid appendix. So this, I mentioned this guideline 1, I believe, is first aid. So this appendix is a couple of pages, but it has charts that talk in detail about the different types of first aid kits, what's in them, how many you need, of which type, how many first aiders you need, of which certification level, that kind of thing. Flotation garments, we just went through this. Same thing. Appendix D, adverse weather conditions, thermal stress. Again, employers must develop, implement, and train workers in safe procedures to control this. I know typically you guys are all over this. You know, employers must keep air temperature, radiant temperature, humidity, and blah, blah, blah at workplace appropriate levels. And again, it's really, you know, about that abandoned warehouse or, you know, you know, the disaster set that's full of rubble and God knows how many dead rats are buried under it, that kind of thing, to make sure that these issues are paid attention to. And so there's a link to Safe Work Manitoba's heat stress tip card, which is for both too hot and too cold. Appendix F. Nothing really happened there. We just changed the name of the department. Appendix H. Committee members must be trained to effectively fulfill their duties. So this is again back to, you know, don't elect a safety and health person who hasn't received the training and, you know at least knows the basics. Don't appoint or elect someone to a workplace safety and health committee or to be that rep without some safety training. So this communication and information, and it really just reinforces that workplace safety and health officers have the ultimate authority. You know, you could receive an order that sends everybody home right now. Drop everything and get out of here if a workplace safety and health officer says so. And Jack, can you talk a little bit about the authority they have and what the appeal process might be?
Sure. It's the short note. It's quite immense. I mean, it's quite clear in the legislation that there's very few circumstances in which they would require a court order. You know, private residence, sure, but otherwise. So in a set setting, they can walk onto your location and they can look at your scaffolding if they deem that it's been set up properly and you can't produce the documents that you referenced, Rob, and I guess the clarification they need to ensure that it is safe, then they can just have it, they can provide you with a stop work order immediately. And that set or that part of it is shut down. Yeah, it's quite immense. People are quite surprised when they find out. So my advice is always just listen more than you talk. When an officer comes, be clear, you understand what it is that they're asking, and just, you know, be respectful. I mean, they're doing a job same as you'd be doing a job. So that's best advice I can give for that. And the appeal process, if you disagree, Rob, with an officer's ruling, then you advise them of that. That appeal goes to the director of workplace safety and health. And there's various stages that are outlined in the first 60 pages of the act that describe that as well. But again, that's a timely process. But in the meantime, that stop work order or that improvement order, that officer determines it starts and it's in effect until that issue is resolved. How's that?
Perfect.
Okay.
Okay. Moving on at light speed here. Yeah, so we just changed some more department names and clarified workplace safety and health branch / officer. Appendix S rather. Workplace Hazardous Materials Information System, WHEMIS. Employers must ensure that workers working with or exposed to hazardous products are trained in the content, purpose, and importance of supplier labels. Ensure that MSDS sheets are on hand for hazardous products, you know, posted on the bulletin board of that particular workplace or setting or shop or whatever it may be. Ensure that workers are trained effectively and comply with WHEMIS protocols. And that training is developed in consultation with a workplace safety and health committee, the representatives, or the workers. WHEMIS again, supplier labels. And this is one that I was imagining probably would apply more to the paint department and the makeup people than other departments. But then again, I don't know. Employers must ensure that products are labeled in accordance with the hazardous products regs, that supplier labels are printed and attached to the products immediately if it comes in unlabeled. And this is one that may or may not happen much in the industry, but employers must assure hazardous products that are moved or decanted into new containers get a relabel or a copy of that label affixed forthwith. Threshold limit values, where an airborne hazard is assessed as a workplace hazard, that TLV, threshold limit value, has been established. The employer must establish an occupational exposure limit that does not exceed that TLV. So it's complex, but the guide gives you the links to where to look all this stuff up. And the most current example I have is when at the Royal Manitoba Theatre Centre, when the shop is chopping metal all day, the people in the paint shop and the people in the prop shop and the people in the rehearsal hall all smell this burnt iron and it's a smoke in the air, and it's a huge problem. And their ventilation system is 50 years old, and it's loud and not very efficient, and they're working on it. So, questions? What do we have now?
Hi, Rob. I don't see any it's Mariam. I don't see any questions yet. If anyone would like to ask a question, just put it in the chat, and we'll read it out to Rob and Jack.
Sure.
Or you can raise your hand, of course.
So I'm sorry, we whipped through that last bit, but as I said at the outset, it's really not something we decided to do. It's something that legislation compelled On Screen Manitoba to do, and that we didn't make anything up. We just.
What do they say, Rob? Don't shoot the messenger. Is that part of this?
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it was interesting. We did get some pushback when we launched the first guideline in 2015.
Yeah, I think, Rob, that was probably a bit of confusion as people were not expecting to see workplace legislation grouped before in a single location. And really the purpose of the guide is to group workplace legislation that is particularly pertinent to the media production industry in a single guide. But of course, every employer is responsible for ensuring that they're following workplace legislation. This is really intended to help people find their way. I'll maybe just step in quickly and thank you, Rob, for all of your work in updating the guide and in preparing the PowerPoint today. And thank you also, Jack, for leaning in as you did today and as you did throughout the process as we updated the guide. And as I know you will continue to do as people do have questions. I'm sure it was a lot of information to take in a short period of time. But please, if you do have questions as you read through the PowerPoint, and once we release the guide, as you read through the guide, please reach out. Easiest is to email Mariam, who is our membership and industry liaison, and she will make sure that we track down the right information and provide you with some additional feedback. So just a note to say that we will publish the PowerPoint to our website, and we will circulate it to everybody who registered for the program today, along with a recording of the session in case you want to look at it again or share it with a colleague. We expect that by about mid-June, we will be able to post the PDF of the fully updated guidelines. So there will both be a PDF version and a printed version, which will follow shortly upon the release of the PDF version.
There are
questions. I was just going to ask.
Yeah, that's okay. A couple came into me. So some you've already addressed. A couple folks were asking if and when hard copies would be available. So that's good. And we just have a comment from Dave Brown, who says, thank you to everyone. I had a look at guideline number 22, and it is still fine the way it is. When I wrote it, I took care to separate should from shall. Shall must be backed up by legislation, in particular firearm firearms laws in Canada. And we've got a question from Krista asking, is the WSH Act and Regulation 2016 still the most recent?
No.
No, there's 2020. There's a link. We showed it earlier in the PowerPoint to a 2020 revision. And to save yourselves time, read the regs, the guideline, the regulations are where the meat and potatoes are, and it's half the size of the 358-page legal document.
Rob, it's 352 pages of bliss, I like to call it. You know, it's wonderful stuff. And just for clarification, the 20
Jack, we can't hear you, Jack. You're
Time for safety and health to upgrade their Wi-Fi.
harmonizing changes to the act, as well as the 2019. I could do the mind thing, you know, but that won't work. We did. That's weird. It's
And it looks like we've got a question from Terrence. If you'd like to unmute, you could ask.
I was more just a comment just for Krista's question and anybody else from IATSE 856. On our website in the safety section, you'll find links to all the latest updates, including the 2020 Workplace Safety and Health Acts and Regulations.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we could note that some of these changes have been introduced over the past 5 years. We're just taking advantage of this second edition to update everything so that you have a guide in one spot. But that's great. Thank you, Terrence. Any other questions? I know it's been a long session and we're a little over time. So if there are no additional questions, and if Rob and Jack have no further comments.
Apparently I don't, because can you hear me?
We can now.
I was going to default to my mime training there, you know. I just wanted to say that overall, that how thrilled I am to, on behalf of Safe Work, to be part of this. I think the folks, the industry is going in the right direction, and everything's about developing, training, and enforcing the compliance with the safe work procedures. Yeah, it's wonderful. Thank you. I appreciate being here.
And a very warm thank you again to all of the stakeholders who've contributed. I see Rachel Rusin and Kenny Boyce were able to join the session a few minutes late. So thank you for that. I see Louise, many people out there all participating. So I thank you for that. And I know how important safety is for everybody in this industry. And as Rob mentioned, we all had the opportunity to take a deep dive into how important it is that we each take responsibility for safety of ourselves and of each other as we've learned to work during the COVID-19 pandemic. I hope that this guide will help all of us continue to take responsibility for safety and health on set, in the production office, on location, and any of our filming work sites as we continue to grow as an industry.
Yes.
Louise, you're raising your hand. Sorry.
Yeah, both literally and digitally. I was just going to have a question to see. I know that everything that we've been talking about is being primarily, with shoots that are union shoots. Just any suggestions out there for shoots that are non-union shoots in terms of imparting, the same level of safety and guidelines and tools to people that are non-union? Anyone?
Same rules apply.
No, I know, but it's we get the rules, but it's it's imparting them. So Jenny, maybe we can talk offline, maybe you and Melissa and I, where when people are getting permits for things, if it's not a union show, maybe we can figure out a way to bring them into the tent.
Sure, absolutely. I think
Absolutely.
it's just when they know the rules of engagement a bit, they're always wanting to cooperate, right? Especially when it comes to safety. Yeah, safety
Yeah.
first.
Right.
It was great. Thank you. I really appreciate it. It was very informative. And congratulations on having Bill 23 after, I would say, over a decade amended into the HTA to allow people from the community to control traffic. That is a bit of a game changer. I think that's going to be very exciting. So.
Absolutely. Well, thank you everybody for attending today, and special thanks again, Rob and Jack. Really appreciate your time and energy into this project.
Thank you.